play a game?
Why, yes. I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for tuning in. Really glad to have you. Shane Plays, although it's often about games, and this week is indeed about games. Shane Plays is when I play. It's when I get away from the realities of reality and talk about the things that I love. So it's a journey into the things we love. Just anything that I geek about or I think that people might want to hear about that's geeky. But this week, we are going to have another episode on one of the pillars of Shane Plays geekiness, and that is tabletop role-playing games. And we're returning. I'm going to call this episode Tékumel Redux, because several months ago, I had Robert Alberti, aka Bob Alberti, on, who has a lot of experience with Tékumel, and Professor Barker, M.A.R. Barker, and the Tékumel world, and at one time was the treasurer for the Tékumel Foundation. And we had a wonderful conversation about Professor Barker and Tékumel. I was interested in Tékumel at the time, but since talking with Mr. Alberti, getting deeper into Tékumel, reading The Man of Gold, which is a wonderful book by Professor Barker. There's other books out there that I'm looking forward to reading. Playing some Tékumel, buying Tékumel games and reading them. I continue to become more fascinated with Tékumel, also known as the Empire of the Petal Throne, the first published tabletop RPG setting, which that's what most people know of it when it gets this little footnote in history. Oh, it's the first published tabletop RPG setting, but it's so much more than that. It's exotic, it's fun, it has world building on the level of Tolkien. And at the most recent North Texas RPG Con, I had the extreme pleasure of not only talking with Victor Raymond, who was part of Professor Barker's gaming groups, but is a deep Tékumel fan and is the president of the Tékumel Foundation. Hello, Victor.
Hey there.
Hey, there he is. So I had the pleasure of talking with you. You regaled me with tales of role-playing of yore. Great, wonderful storyteller. I had the pleasure of playing in one of your Tékumel games, where we dungeon crawled, or crypt crawled, and it ended up terribly awful, and that was great, and we loved it. So it had all the ferocity and exoticity, is that a word? Exoticness of Tékumel. Mm-hmm. So welcome to the show, Victor. Thanks for making the time. Okay, so I thought that I had lucked into a wonderful circumstance by talking to Bob Alberti, and I did.
Oh, you did. Absolutely.
I love Bob Alberti, but lightning has, against all odds, struck twice with the fact that I was able to connect with you. Because I mean it when I say I want more people to know about Tékumel and the world and setting, and the Empire of the Petal Throne and Professor M.A.R. Barker, who, they need to make a movie about this guy. He's a real fascinating personality. So let's do this. Why don't you catch us up on what you're currently doing? And after that, I want you to regale us with tales of Tékumel and talk to us a little bit about what you do with the Tékumel Foundation. But first off, what is Victor Raymond up to these days?
Well, what I do these days is I am writing and doing some game design stuff, partly because of the Tékumel Foundation and partly, I have several decades now of gaming material, some of which might be salvageable and people might enjoy. And I'm trying to see if there's stuff that I've got that I can make into something that I can make available for folks. So, and in addition to all of that, I am one of the people who helps make the Tékumel Foundation run. And I also am involved with some other groups like the Speculative Literature Foundation and So I have my feet in science fiction and fantasy and writing and fandom, and also in game design and tabletop RPGs. So
Just a little bit about what game design involved in. Is this the same writing you were talking about? You were dusting some stuff off.
actually, there's some material that I'm working on right now, one of which is a book about telling people that you too can run Empire of the Petal Throne. The working title for which is The Egg of the World. Over easy, I hope.
Yeah, over easy. Yeah. Tékumel. And let me just, one of the things that you said when we were playing Tékumel and talking about Tékumel at North Texas RPG Con was, you said that I think some people have this idea that Tékumel is hard to learn or get into, and you said the best way is just play it.
Yes.
Just play it.
Absolutely.
I did not feel that it was inaccessible at all, because you don't eat. What do they say? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah,
I mean, when you sit down to play Tékumel, you're not trying to be. It's like when you read the first chapter of The Hobbit, you're not trying to learn the entire 20-volume set of everything that Tolkien wrote about the world, right? I mean, you're just having fun.
You must first learn both Quenya and Sindarin.
Yeah, you must learn the languages. No, just have fun.
Memorize the lay of Beren and Luthien. And then you have learned all of the ways of Morgoth.
And then you may turn the title page on The Hobbit.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's how people talk about Tékumel.
Yeah, and it's not like that. I mean, when we played Tékumel, obviously it was an exotic, fun setting, but it was a dungeon crawl.
Mm-hmm.
Because you ran it in M.A.R. Barker's original Tékumel rules, which was an expanded version of the OD&D rules.
Yes, Professor Barker ended up learning how to play Dungeons and Dragons from Michael Mornard, who is still around in gaming yet today. And Michael was he had grown up in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and he had played in Gary Gygax's Greyhawk campaign. He then became a college freshman at the University of Minnesota and played for a little bit in Dave Arneson's Blackmoor campaign, now that I have those properly situated. And he was, as a student, he went to meetings of the game club that existed on the University of Minnesota campus at Kauffman Memorial Union. And there he encountered Professor Barker, who was the faculty advisor for the club. And Professor Barker picked up D&D, played it, and pretty much his first question was, "This is great, but where's the world?" Right. He was already familiar with a lot of the same fantasy literature that had inspired Gary and Dave. So, Jack Vance and Fritz Leiber and Robert E. Howard and Tolkien.
The famous Appendix N type stuff. Yeah.
Right. He knew that stuff. And so he was kind of looking to see what else was there. And through an accident of his own personal history, he had been working on his own fantasy world since he was a kid, and that was the world of Tékumel. And so in early 1974, he had been introduced to D&D in 73. In early 74, he picked up a copy of original Dungeons and Dragons. And then
he was introduced to D&D before it was formally published.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Michael had brought with him a set of the last playtest rules, some of which I think is now preserved as the Menard fragments.
The Menard fragments from John Peterson has a blog post about the Menard fragments. Right.
Yep. John does great work.
Yeah, we love John.
Really, really good work. And so when D&D became available, Professor Barker picked up a copy, and then he proceeded to sit down and write up his own thoughts. And using original D&D as an inspiration, he proceeded to put together what is now referred to as the Mimeo EPT, which we have available as a PDF from the Tékumel Foundation. But the Mimeo EPT contrary to some things you'll see on the internet, was never made available for sale. It was never a public product. It was a set of playtest rules that Professor Barker made available privately to his players, and he knew a lot of gamers. That's probably where people got the idea that somehow it was publicly published. That's not true.
There were a lot of people that had exposure to it, but it was never actually formally published.
Yeah, that's a thing there. But he put that together, and he was a linguist, and so his own approach to things involved being complete. You want to have every bit of what you need to know in order to make everything work. So, Empire of the Petal Throne, from the very start, is this wonderful mix of the original D&D rules with some playtesting modifications. And then along with that, built with a world all around it and through it. And the world of Tékumel was something that came to the attention of Gary Gygax through a number of different people. Michael Menard had mentioned it. Bill Hoyt had mentioned it. And this then led to, eventually, about a year and a half later, the publication of Empire of the Petal Throne as a boxed game. It was sort of the premier, sort of top-shelf role-playing game of the time, which I think was both really good because they put a lot of quality into it, but it also was unfortunately something that made it a little less accessible because $25 or $30 in 1975 was not a small amount of money.
It was a premium product. Yeah, it was probably, it sounds like the first premium product for the tabletop RPG industry.
Yeah, I would have to say so. Yeah.
And so, and I mean, but people remember it up until about 2 years ago. The only thing I knew about it was that it was whispered about in hushed tones as the first setting published.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still remembered that way. But it's so much more than that, and you even mentioned it was modified OD&D. When we were playing at your session, you were running, I think, the original Tékumel rules that Professor Barker used, and I think you had a couple of house rules you were using. I would not have guessed that it was modified OD&D. It felt much richer than that. It felt like it was doing a lot that I wouldn't expect OD&D to have done, especially when it came to the magic system.
Well, and that's probably one of the places where there's the greatest variance from original D&D is the magic system, which is still in Empire of the Petal Throne somewhat, I have to say, D&D-ified. But it was based on the concepts of magic that came out of the world itself, that magic is a mental discipline where you use your mind to reach out to interplanar space, and that interplanar space provides you with the energy, and you then focus it in order to create the effect. And so different spells create different effects. This is not terribly surprising, but it is also exactly in parallel with the technology, because that's what technology does. Or I should say, the quote-unquote magic items, some of them, in Empire of the Petal Throne are the detritus of the ancient past. These are items that allow people to create the same effect. All they have to do is press a button, right? These are called eyes. And so in some ways, in Tékumel, magic is the result of technology.
Right. Yeah. It's the, I mean, there is real magic, but there's also that, it's basically a cliche these days that any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. What is that? The Clark principle or the Clark law or whatever?
Clark's third law. Yeah. And in Tékumel, that almost stands it on its head. Any sufficiently advanced magic is indistinguishable from technology. Because Tékumel, as a science fantasy setting, I should probably back up. You got some of this from talking to Bob, but the brief form for people out there is that Tékumel is a science fantasy setting. It is a post-apocalypse world. Tékumel and its star system for reasons still unknown, are put into a pocket dimension after having been colonized during a period of interstellar exploration. And when the star system goes into its pocket dimension, it's cut off from all of that technology that made everything run. And then civilization collapses over millennia and then builds up again, collapses, builds up again. Do that several more times, and you get to the world of the Empire, the Petal Throne.
Yeah, it almost, and I'm not, I have to be careful saying stuff like this because I'm not saying that there's appropriation or anything like that. But the more I learn about the Tékumel, the more it makes me think of Numenera, Monty Cook's Ninth World, where that postulates that in that setting that major empires have risen and fallen 8 times, and now you're in the 9th one. So there's all this amazing stuff just laying around and not truly understood, you know. But Tékumel also adds, you know, like genuine magic into the mix. I can't remember if Numenera has magic. So it's science fantasy, but it doesn't feel, it's not science in the fact, I mean, there could probably be a robot running around, but you're not, you know, it's not like Cylons running around and laser rifles and stuff like that. It's much more exotic and subtle.
Yeah, those are called Ru'un.
Ru'un, yeah. And it's fascinating. You know, I so much stuff in Tékumel. I mean, everything has its own word and its own language. Because like Tolkien, Professor Barker was a linguist. And, you know, I discussed this with Robert Alberti when he joined the show, and you and I talked about it at North Texas RPG Con, but I can't help but think that there has to be something about the way a linguist mind works. Because here we have 2 professors of linguistics that have done world building on a scale that's probably unequaled, whether it's in games or anything else. It's you know, Tolkien, people often talk about how deep Tolkien's world building goes. The world building of Tékumel, in my opinion, is even more impressive, as much as I love Tolkien, because Tolkien basically drew upon European sources, in a sense.
Northern European sources,
feels Northern European, Anglo-Saxon kind of thing. Tékumel is a mix of what all influences would you say are in Tékumel?
Professor Barker was inspired by Mesoamerican civilizations, the Maya. He was, in fact, part of, and in fact, an officer of the Maya Society of Minnesota for many years. So the Mayans were an influence, Aztecs, Olmecs, others, Incas, as well as Arab and Indian mythologies and other Asian mythologies and cultures. That provided the basis for Professor Barker to imaginatively create something that, as I said, was inspired by, but distinct from those. Whenever anyone talks about, you know, cultural appropriation, you know, I try to remind them Tékumel is its own thing. It is and sometimes people will do things. They'll say they'll bring out something from some culture, and they'll say this is Tékumel. I'd say, well, it's an inspiration for Tékumel, but Tékumel is not Aztec. It's not Indian.
It's a fusion of multiple inspirations. It makes it feel very rich. And I don't know how many different languages did he write for Tékumel. I mean, there's literally books where you can learn languages, correct?
Yes, the Suliani language is a 2-book set that you could use to learn and understand Suliani. There's also a Suliani primer, and Professor Barker did work on several other languages, though not to the same depth. both ones that would be modern contemporaries of Solyani, like Muglavyani and Livyani, Salarvyani and Yankoriani. These are all part of what he termed the Kaishan language group, which to linguists is a very familiar concept. But he also did work on other languages that are, I will say, very esoteric. The Sinus grammar, which is an integral part of understanding interplanar relationships in magic. Yeah, that's another one that he did a lot of work on.
So, how do you speak any of these languages?
I have what Professor Barker termed a schoolboy's fist for Solyani. That is to say, I can write it out fairly well if I know what I'm doing. I understand some Solyani words and terms and phrases. Professor Barker did encourage us to develop a traveler's familiarity with Solyani. But I can't say that I'm fluent in any way.
So do you know anybody that has put the time in to learn one fluently?
Probably he's no longer with us, but Curtis Scott, the author of the Solyani Primer, was probably the person who came the closest to speaking Solyani fluently. That's probably something we ought to do is have summer camps. Send your kid away to learn Solyani.
Yeah, learn Solyani. Yeah, learn a new language and play OD&D inspired tabletop role playing games.
You can do that these days. People aren't nearly as upset, though I suspect that if we brought out the Book of Ebon Bindings, that parents might just get a little concerned.
Just a little bit. Yeah, I bought from is it Black Blade Publishing?
Uh-huh.
They were at North Texas. I bought, the hardcover reprints of all of 2 or 3 original Tékumel books, and I'm very glad to have them. So I love looking through those. Which brings me to one of my questions. How many different versions? I know that there was the original Empire of the Petal Throne that Professor Barker published, but he called it a something and something game, like a Swords and
Glory.
Yeah, Swords and Glory was actually the name of the game, correct?
Okay, so the question I think you're asking is how many different versions or how many different games have been published for Tékumel?
That's the overall question, but I guess I'm also asking the sub-question, did Professor Barker refer to his game as Swords and Glory or as Empire of the Petal Throne?
No, in fact, actually, he referred to his game as Tékumel.
Okay.
And a place in Tékumel is the Empire of the Petal Throne.
Right.
Tékumel, because of how it was originally produced, set a really high bar for what came afterwards. And what happened from about 1980 going forward was an odyssey of small game companies trying their level best to match that top shelf presentation in Empire of the Petal Throne. And increasingly having difficulty doing it because there was additional lore that was produced. There were developments that Professor Barker made. There were things that came along. Probably the most successful of the sets of rules that came after it was Gardacial, Deeds of Glory, which came about in the late 80s and early 90s from Theater of the Mind Enterprises tome, which was associated also with A Clash of Arms. As I understand it, I think Tome still has some box set material available. If you order from them, you have to kind of dig or call them up, but they might still have some of that. But the thing about it is that Professor Barker had this world, and this world got presented in a bunch of different ways and a bunch of different rules. And the successor set to Empire of the Petal Throne was Swords and Glory.
Okay.
That successor set, all right, I'm not going to pull any punches. Swords and Glory is a classic early 1980s, we must have a game mechanic for everything set of rules.
Okay.
It is contemporaneous with things like Chivalry and Sorcery, 2nd edition. Probably one of, I think we're getting into the Avalon Hill presentation of RuneQuest. That may have come a couple of years later. But as a set of rules, Swords and Glory was influenced by what people were doing in gaming at the time, which was, well, your character could be doing almost anything, so we better have some way of dealing with it, right?
Right.
So if you look in the player's handbook for Swords and Glory, you will find that there is indeed a chart for damage done to player character by falling trebuchet shot.
Right.
Because, that's going to happen, right? So,
right. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Okay. And the other thing that I think Tékumel missed out on, and partly because it is this amazing immersive world, was that the idea of having modules or adventures was something that Tékumel didn't have. And there's some reasons for that. I can speculate. I'd be retconning if I tried to explain it all. But the lack of adventures and the successive sets of rules and lore, I think just simply began to make Tékumel into that myth and legend that it's been up until not that long ago. And largely because of the fact that people were like, oh my God, there's so much to learn. Sure. There's so much to learn now if you play the Elder Scrolls, or if you play The Witcher, or if you play Star Wars. The sheer amount of lore. I have a friend who's a Star Wars fan, nonpareil. He knows the lore back and forth very, very well. And there's arguably more of it for Star Wars now than there was back then. But back then, Tékumel looked very exotic.
Well, do you think that, like Elder Scrolls or Star Wars, or heck, even if you got into Arthurian legends, which there's quite a bit, do you think that didn't, psychologically, it didn't feel as insurmountable because a lot of the lore and world building of Tékumel is not, I don't know if natural is the right word. Like it's not a Western mindset in a lot of ways.
There's some of that. I mean, I've played many hours in Morrowind and Oblivion and Skyrim, and I have to tell you that I really appreciated the amount of work that went into those in order to present some truly interesting pieces of lore.
Right.
I mean, like, for example, I think it's in Oblivion that one of the things you end up dealing with is if you go on the Mage Guild quest line is, or maybe even part of the main quest line is, you end up having to deal with Mankar Cameron's Paradise, where you have a radically different visioning of the creation of the cosmos and the place of the deities within it. That what's presented as the 8 divines or the 9 divines in the Cyrodiilic Imperium are simply demon lords who decided to go off and do something on their own, as opposed to all the other Daedra that knew that humanity was simply a race to be subjugated like any other.
Right. Yeah.
And, if I can develop that from just having played the game a little bit, I think the biggest thing is that Tékumel has wonderful material in it, and you learn from it, but it's never had the sort of following that allows it to become part of the mainstream.
Right, and I think that's fair.
People who basically say, "Oh, I get it. Here, let me share it with you."
Right. Yeah, where it just kind of disseminates, it cross-pollinates and everything, right? Hasn't hit that critical mass.
Yeah, I mean, if we had, several $1 billion in order to present it, I suspect we too could be talking about the intricacies of the interplanar deities in Tékumel, and the video games that go along with it.
That would be mind-blowing to get a good Tékumel video game. So
there is a computer game that's available.
Is there?
Yes,
And what is that? I'm going to look it up right now.
It's Choice of the Petal Throne from Choice of Games.
Is it like a strategy game, role-playing game? What is it?
It is a role-playing game. It is a text-based role-playing game. Choose your own adventure, but far more sophisticated than just that. And it's a really lovely bit of work.
It's on Steam. Choice of the Petal Throne. Let me look at this. I will put that in the show notes. It's $3.99. How can you go wrong?
Yes. The author, Daniel Godot, did a really, really good job on putting all the different pieces of lore together in a very believable and very, I think, engaging way. So I hope people will check it out and play it.
It's described as a 124,000 word interactive fantasy novel.
Yep.
So, very nice. Yeah, I'm in. Yeah, thanks for letting me know about that. So, and to be fair, the lore, as long as we're talking about the amount of lore and trying to keep up with the lore, the lore of the Elder Scrolls has gotten so large over the 2 decades. I think that it's been out, is that one of the original people involved with D&D, Lawrence Schick, was actually, I think up until fairly recently, the official lore master for Elder Scrolls
Online, if I recall.
Yeah. So,
Lawrence Schick, who, by the way, did some absolutely fascinating articles that appeared in The Dragon. He's had adventures published. He has a very long pedigree in tabletop role-playing. In fact, actually, I'm going to point to, let me see here. One of the things that he worked on was in Dragon Magazine, and I think it's in issue number 26. It is an article about different pantheons that you could use in your own D&D game. And it's not 26, it's another one. I'm going to see if I can find it. Oh, it's in, I'm sorry, I was close. It's Dragon number 24. Volume 3, number 10, Choir Practice at the First Church of Lawful Evil, open parentheses, Orthodox, close parentheses, the ramifications of alignment. And there's a whole discussion in here about the different tenets of law and neutrality and chaos, as well as also the deities and what they look like. And Lawrence Schick put a lot of work into presenting pantheons, a range of gods here that make sense within the concept of alignment within D&D. And immediately following that is an article by G. Arthur Rahman called Naming People, Places, and Things in Petal Throne. And I think the juxtaposition is, it may be coincidental, but I think it's entirely appropriate.
Yes, right.
This business of having this elaborate pantheon that is completely original. It has nothing to do with the material that you would see in either deities and demigods or in gods, demigods, and heroes. Yeah. Lawrence Schick was, in the history of gaming, someone who would easily pick up on the complexities of not only Empire of the Petal Throne, but clearly the Elder Scrolls. But he's not the only one. Another person who was involved in tabletop role-playing from a very early time was Ken Rolston, whose name you will probably associate more with RuneQuest and with Paranoia, interestingly enough. And Ken Rolston served as, I think, one of the lead designers on Morrowind. Shane, have you ever played Morrowind?
I have stuck my toe into it. And played with it some, and I've played some Elder Scrolls games, but I did not go deep into Morrowind, although I know that there are people that basically would live their life there if they could.
Stop looking at me like that. But no, this is relevant stuff. I mean, because Ken, long ago, was clearly an admirer of Empire of the Petal Throne. And some of that world building shows up in Morrowind. A lot of what happened with Morrowind happened largely because Bethesda was being, the upper echelons of Bethesda were being distracted by, the other games they were trying to launch, and Morrowind was just sort of operating in the background.
And let me point out that between people I've interviewed and my friend Matt Barton, I've co-authored the second edition of his book with him, the Dungeons and Desktops, the history of computer role-playing games.
Aha. Okay.
So many times when a great game comes out, that was the dynamic. Nobody was paying attention in management.
Yeah, that's what happened with the second version of XCOM. They were trying to do this 1950s first-person shooter, and it was really glitching out, and nothing was working. And they had in the background, could you just do a remake of the original game? And the remake of the original game was wildly successful.
Right.
Yeah. No, here in Morrowind. Okay, so the conceits in the Elder Scroll games are that you start off as a nobody to become a somebody, right? And
as with many RPG games in that time.
Yeah.
Yep.
And in Morrowind, it begins with you wake up in the hold of a ship, and there's a dark elf who's there with you, a fellow by the name of Geek. And the game begins with him saying to you, the game begins with you having one of the Daedra giving you a foreshadowing introduction in the form of a dream. But when you wake up, Geek says to you, "Wake up. What's your name? You are dreaming. What's your name?"
Right.
You give yourself a name, and then you learn all the usual things that you learn at the beginning. But you walk out onto the deck of the ship, and you encounter these Imperial guards dressed in their somewhat faux Roman armor. And they say, our records show that you've arrived, but they don't show from where. And then you get to design a little bit more.
Right.
And you walk on, onto the dock, and then into the building, the Customs and Excise office. And you're met by this fellow who's wearing these, very grandiose robes. He's bald with white hair and this neatly trimmed goatee. And he looks at you and says, "Ah, yes, there are several ways we can do this, and the choice is yours." Right? And then you go through this whole, one is you can just choose a class, you can construct a class, or you can answer a bunch of interesting questions, and that will determine what class your character is. One morning, when you're helping your mother cooking,
right,
stovepipe loosens its moorings and falls towards her red hot. What do you do? Right?
Right.
No, I haven't played this game too much.
Not at all.
Not at all.
And I have to point out that Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar, kind of pioneered that. Let me give you a personality test and suggest a class thing. But anyway, back to your point.
Okay, so you're saying, wow, and this guy who's asking you all these questions in game, his name is Securtius Urgula, right? That's Ken. I could take a photograph of Ken and put it up against the picture of Securtius Urgula from the game, and 20-year-old graphics notwithstanding, they are the same person.
That's the person.
Yeah. Now, the funny thing about that is that later on, you end up running across this Telvanni wizard who's going to do things for you and help you out in the game. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but the way that the dialogue is written for that, because it's not voice acted, it's scripted, right? It's all presented to you. That's how Ken runs his games, right? That your interaction with this vastly powerful Telvanni wizard is written in a way that Ken would run games if you were playing with him at a convention.
No, interesting.
And I there basically at both points in the game I was like, Ken.
Yeah, that must be very interesting to know somebody well enough to see, the veil gets lifted a little bit. So, yeah.
Those sorts of Easter eggs show up in many, many games, I'm sure. In this particular case, it was really kind of pleasant. And Morrowind has that it has that same sense of strangeness that you don't know what to expect when you're initially playing the game. And I could very easily see, especially the way they both start off with you're fresh off the boat.
Right.
Tékumel clearly was inspirational.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you just, one other thing about Morrowind that impressed me. My experience with Morrowind, I spent like a day. I think somebody lent me the Xbox copy,
Mm-hmm.
and I spent like a day online figuring out how I wanted to make my character.
Mm-hmm.
And then I made my character, and I got into Morrowind and ran around. And I mean, my impression of Morrowind, I was very impressed because it was basically like an MMO written for one person. It was very large in scope. And it had, a lot of choice, and, you weren't on rails or anything like that. But I think what scared me off at the time, I think I was really busy in life in general, and I didn't have time to dedicate to it. But I've heard so many people sing the praises of Morrowind.
The thing that most often throws people off of Morrowind is that the main quest does not drive things.
Right. Yeah. Which back then, especially, that would have been like people like, what's going on? These days, I think people are a little bit more used to that kind of thing. But yeah, back then it's like, what am I supposed to do?
Well,
Yeah.
You're supposed to go to Balmora and meet with a fellow there, and he'll give you further orders.
Well, there you go. All right. So I want to.
We can get back to Tékumel.
Yeah, we'll have to because just to keep things somewhat on track. But yeah, Morrowind. I mean, I hear nothing but good stuff from Morrowind. Elder Scrolls is a franchise that puts out games people love and connect with on a very deep level, and a lot of it is because of that lore and rich game building. But that is kind of a nice segue. What you mentioned earlier about alignments and deities and this and that and the other. Mm-hmm. I think that if people dig this aspect of Tékumel, I think that this is a game or a setting that they're probably going to want to know more about, whether it's reading the books or playing the game or just reading about. There's a deep rabbit hole of Tékumel out there. And it's however far you want to go, and every layer of the rabbit hole that you go in is interesting. So you don't have to dig to get to the good stuff. But I said all that to say there is no real good and evil in Tékumel. There is stability and chaos. Is that right?
Stability and change.
Stability and change. My bad.
Let me lay this out for you. In some relatively simple ways. To a modern American, words like, really anyone, 21st century person, you talk about things like good and evil. We have a lot of connotations that we associate with those two words. And some of them are very basic. Oh, this tastes good. Some of them are more, how would you say, overarching. Mass murder is evil, right? Okay.
Right.
And to a Soliani, someone in Tékumel, the words are Lan and Busan, good and evil, or good and bad, I should say. They don't have those same overarching senses of morality attached to them. To say something tastes good, sure, absolutely, fine. To say mass murder is evil would involve, if you were to say that in Soliani, would involve having to couch what you're saying in terms of you'd have to use other moral principles to get there. And most of it being that to its Soliani, the concepts are not good and evil that guide your behavior and your place in society. It's whether an act is noble or ignoble. Okay? Now I'm getting deep in the lore, right?
I mean, let me stop you there, but we'll go deeper with it. That's a very... that approach is, if you can get that, then that not only will kind of be an indicator of whether Tékumel might be a setting that you like, but it'll also help your role playing dramatically.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah. Because it's about, I think maybe you use this word, or maybe Bob Alberti used it, or somebody I know I was talking about. It's right thinking. And that's not right thinking like Big Brother has programmed you how to think. It's right thinking as is your thoughts or what you're saying about this situation, is it appropriate to what you believe and what you not even in a moral relativism sense. But from the deity you follow, and you come from a background of stability or change, from the clan you're from. There's all these things that factor in to whether what you're doing is noble. Because two people could walk up right next to each other. One person could kill somebody in front of them, and the person right next to him could kill somebody in front of them. And for one of them, it could be a noble act, and for the other one, it could be an ignoble act.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
So anyway, continue.
Oh yeah, no, and that concept of nobility and ignobility, it means that, and this is probably the other thing that that threw early D&D players, was that you're expected to fulfill your role in society, right?
Right. It's not the rugged individualist.
Yeah, in D&D, I don't want to go too deeply academically here, but in D&D, the idea of murder hobos exists largely because there isn't any society to guide people's actions. Okay.
Right. They're adventurers in a pseudo medieval world with magic.
Right. And
that's about the extent of it.
Yeah. And hardly anybody is going around and saying, you know what, that wasn't really good of you to do. That wasn't appropriate for you to do. But they were goblins. We had to kill them. No one ever really talks about whether or not killing goblins is the right thing to do.
Well, they're talking about it more these days. There's a lot of wrestling with but I'll tell you, and here is my blanket statement on alignment and D&D and all that. And then, we can get back into Tékumel. I have no problem whatsoever in a fantasy setting, right?
Yeah.
That has cosmological forces of good and evil, with goblins being evil or orcs being evil or whatever. I have no problem with that. Orcs, okay, these goblins are evil. They should be exterminated on sight. However, if somebody wants to play their D&D game where they're not by default evil, that's fine too. But I also have no problem whatsoever with an evil race, just like I have no problem with an inherently good race in a fantasy setting.
In one of the things that makes Tékumel, I think, interesting and avoids some of that question is that in Tékumel, races are alien species.
Right. And there's some really interesting ones. I mean, They're exotic. They're not just humanoids with a different tone of skin and scales. I mean, they're exotic. They're not just taller with pointed ears.
Yeah. And to the extent that there is enduring hostility and enmity between some of those species and other species, including humanity, that's much more a result of the history and the what made Tékumel what it is today, right?
Right. And as you pointed out, the Empire of the Petal Throne is just one nation or culture within the broader world. It's bordered by hostile nations.
Right. I mean, there was there was a point when I was playing in Professor Barker's game where, as we all knew, right, this was one of those things. As we all knew, the non-human species called the Hlus and the Su, that's Shu, that's SSU.
Which one is it that if you smell cinnamon, you have to run? Which one is that?
It's a Shu.
Okay.
Right.
It even says Dave Arneson wrote a foreword to one of the Tékumel books, and he says something like, if you smell cinnamon, run.
Musty cinnamon, high chiming sound, blue lights, get the hell out.
Yeah, get going. Get the hints.
Just go. As we all knew, they were inimical, hostile, could not be in any way communicated with or reasoned with. We should assume that it was a kill or be killed situation, right? Until we encountered some Sioux in Professor Barker's game who were like, oh, hi, how are you?
They invited you to tea?
Almost. They were just kind of, what's going on here?
Right.
very strange moment.
I am confused. Should I not be either running or attacking?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They actually ended up helping us, and I'm not quite sure why. But I want to go back. We were talking about good, evil, nobility, ignobility, and we talked about stability and change. Okay. And for Professor Barker, the pantheon that he created, where here are these gods of stability and here are these gods of change, right? And you said for someone to kill someone or to, would be noble. If you are an adherent of the god of change devoted to warfare and destruction, Lord of Famukla, the Lord of flame and fire and destruction. Yeah, that's right. Killing people. Make it happen. Make it so, right? It's more complicated than that, but just basically speaking, if you are an adherent of that god, when you are doing that in the service of the god, that's noble. But say you're not. Say you're a worshiper of Lady Avante, the goddess of stability, who is of hearth and home and life and the preservation of family and community. Killing someone's really pretty ignoble, unless they've done something really, really, really bad, like threatening your family, right? So the context of situations matters in Empire of the Petal Throne and in Tékumel. And that, I think, is one of those things that you have to explore. And some people think that, you have to read enough so And it's like, no, that's not how it works at all. The best way to learn this stuff is to realize that you have arrived here, you as a player know very little about the world. Your character knows very little about where they are. And, there are people here who will help you to understand your place in society. And you're a nobody who could become a somebody, right? So that's the thing that I think makes Tékumel fun, is that you get to explore a world.
Yeah, and it's interesting that there are still, even though, so in Tékumel, because of the makeup of the society and civilization, assuming that you're playing in, is it Soliana?
Soliana?
So yeah, which is the Empire of the Petal Throne, it's assumed that you're fulfilling a role in society. But you can still be an adventurer, because there are many motivations why you might group up with other people with different motivations to go adventure and further your role in society. So it's not like you're just sitting around drinking tea all the time and being polite.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I mean,
there are some people who like, that kind of game. And if you get to a particular point, or if you want to start there, once you've gotten some familiarity, that can be, sort of court intrigue and everything else, that can be cool. But you can do almost anything in Tékumel. Tékumel is a complete world. You want to do pirate adventures? Yes, we can do pirate adventures. Do you want to go deep into underworlds and find secrets that man should not know, a la Call of Cthulhu? Yes, we can do that too. You want to do, you're defending a fort in the desert against the savage inhabitants and their foreign, how do you say, the foreigners who are your enemies, a la Beau Geste. Sure, you can do all that, right? All of these opportunities are available, mostly because it's a world, man. It's a total world.
Yeah, it's a rich world that will throw you for loops just when you think you've got it figured out what's going on. The world, the history of the world, the makeup of the world will throw you for a loop. For example, and I'm giving away a little bit here, but you could adventure, you think you're in a somewhat not primitive, but more of a fantasy type setting, and suddenly you come across like a subway kind of thing that goes all over the whole world. Just for example, so that when we say that it's science fantasy, there's some really cool stuff going on, up to and including what I don't know. Anyway, you're in a pocket dimension and it's fun, and
people don't. There are different layers of knowledge. I mean, the only reference to what we're talking about in the published rules shows up in the description of the suit. as a species. It's the monster description, right? Okay, and it says here that the present Sioux capital is Suyal, but they yearn to retake their ancient stronghold of Suganar, now in Pichano. Sioux parties range through human nations seeking magical devices and weaponry. Their ability to pass human borders and garrisons is proverbial, and it is said that the Sioux have access to some ancient tunnel transportation system now lost to humankind.
Okay, so this is a good segue to the Tékumel fiction.
Sure.
Which I think somebody can go and listen to this podcast and never actually play Tékumel, but go read some of the fiction and benefit from and just enjoy it. Mm-hmm. So, of course, the two that are probably known the best are the Man of Gold,
yes,
and another one called Flame Song. Now, does not the cover of Flame Song, doesn't it show one of these sort of subway spheres?
Yes, the two-boy cars. Yes, it does.
Okay. Yeah, I thought so. So, and that also leads into something exciting that the Tékumel Foundation is doing with Flame Song. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, this is a good time to talk about what the foundation does and your role with it. So let's start off with talking about the republication of Flame Song.
Yeah, we are just about to re-release Flame Song. We're doing a last round of proofreading, and making sure that we've got all the different pieces in place that need to be there. But I expect that literally within the next week or two, we will be releasing Flame Song for people to read. Flame Song is the second novel that was written by Professor Barker. We released The Man of Gold about 5 years ago now, and we're going to release the next novel of the 5 that Professor Barker had written and published. The Lords of Samra will be released, we hope, within the next year. So
yeah, see, I think I read The Man of Gold and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And I think that the Man of Gold, at least, and I'm assuming Flame Song and the others, which I'm looking forward to reading. The only reason that I haven't gotten like on eBay or Amazon and ordered an out-of-print copy of Flame Song is because I know what it's doing and I want to support what you're doing that you publish. Mm-hmm. These books deserve to be in the, like when people talk about all these classic pulp fiction and fantasy fiction, these books deserve to be in there. They're really good. I mean, at least The Man of Gold was. I would say it read like it had the fun and adventure of pulp fiction written by somebody with the intelligence of Tolkien.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. The Man of Gold as a story involves several parts of an underlying set of stories that Professor Barker was exploring through playing Tékumel. And that's probably a thing that I want to emphasize here. I mean, I said earlier, we talked earlier about you should just go play Tékumel in order to understand it. That's what Professor Barker would do. People would ask about, well, so what's going on with this? Name some esoteric part of the lore. And Professor Barker would probably say to them, well, I don't know. I haven't been there yet. Right? And
that's nice.
What are you talking about? It's like,
so the helmet was real. It was like a real world. Yeah.
What Professor Barker did was that he had a mechanism that he used, which was either through writing his stories or through gaming. And he had chanced onto some earlier proto-role-playing, we think, when he was in graduate school, basically shared storytelling with his friends in graduate school, that allowed him to view Tékumel as a place that he could go to and visit. And keep in mind that this is very firmly in the tradition of things like Edgar Rice Burroughs and E.R. Edison and other authors who had written books about, someone from Earth going to another world. Mm-hmm. E.R. Edison in The Worm Ouroboros it starts with a character. He's literally a framing device. Is about the best way to put it. A man on Earth who goes to sleep and dreams of another world, and he goes to that other world in his dreams, and then what comes forth from there is the entire story about Demonland and Witchland, and the fall and rise of King Gorais, and the four lords that opposed him from Witchland. So, and here I am operating on memory, and I should be careful if I say anything else.
You obviously love that style of fiction. So Flame Song is coming, and then you have three more books that the Foundation's hoping to get out.
Yes, and in fact, there's also there are two other partial novels that we are looking at and figuring out what we can do with. One is the unfinished novel that Professor Barker was working on when he died, not quite 10 years ago, and actually just about 10 years ago. And then the other one was a Tékumel novel that he was working on when he was studying in India in the 1950s. So they're very different books. One from the sort of the beginning of his conceptions of Tékumel, and one from the very end. So.
Right. So yeah, to stress that again, something you said very early in the discussion, Tékumel, the world building and the fiction and all that was being worked on long before Dungeons and Dragons ever came along.
Yeah, it actually started in the 1930s.
Which is one of the reasons why it's just so darn rich. It's not like they're not like, oh, we need a D&D setting and let's put something together. I mean, he pulled from existing, it's like the fiction of Tolkien is the tip of the iceberg. So the game of Tékumel is the tip of the iceberg. It feels that way too. You feel that weight, that depth of there's, it's like a real world, and I'm just seeing a little part of it right now. Which and you told me a cool story while we were at North Texas. Did you not say that he retired one of your player characters from the game and put them into the fiction?
Yes.
Okay. What was that character again?
One of the things that people sort of wonder about with Professor Barker's fiction is, oh, this must have been his gaming group. It's like, no, actually not. Most of the vast majority of the characters, particularly the main characters in all of Professor Barker's novels, are his own characters. The player characters show up most of the time as walk-ons. They have cameo appearances. Prince Miricia's New Men, for example, which I think gets introduced. I can't remember if it's at the end of Man of Gold or Flame Song. Now, my character was the Patroi, an alien, graceful alien species, somewhat insectoid in appearance, although...
Yeah, they're my favorite race, and yeah. I like them a lot.
And my Patroi character, a priest of Wuru named Matik. I had played him for quite some time and had really enjoyed playing him. And Professor Barker called me up one day and said, "Victor, I need Matik." I said, "Sure."
Yeah. Okay.
And I can't tell you why. Sure. That's totally fine. And you'll find out later, maybe.
She's like, okay.
And I'm like, all right then. It's like, oh, I guess I'll have to roll up a new character. Yeah. And yeah, so he took Matik. And I have to say, weirdly enough, that Professor Barker was a very astute observer of people. I think as a linguist that may go with it. I'm not sure it always does, but for him it did. And his depiction of Matik was disturbingly familiar.
It's yeah, you're like, oh, yeah. So what kind of role did Matic have in the fiction?
Well, in the fiction, he is there as something of an assistant to the the main characters of the story as they're figuring out what's going on and what to do. Matic was a magic user, the sort of fellow, and a priest with, but really something more of a scholar priest. And his specialty was in other planar relationships and demonology.
Now, was this the one I'm trying to remember? In Man of Gold, the main character had a Pei Choi friend for a while. Was it which book was Matic in?
That was in Death of Kings and Prince of Skulls. Now, in Man of Gold, Harsan, the main character, there is a female Pei Choi who assists him, Iktsa. And Iktsa, she's interesting because she's an ambassador to the under people of Tékumel.
Right. She gets herself killed by trying to make friends with a very deadly underground creature.
Right. The Swamisi. Mm-hmm. But the thing about her is she's very indifferent to the strivings of humanity and the supposedly dominant species. That her entire mission, which is interesting that Professor Barker writes about this, is that he's like, she's entirely about going and establishing connections between people who are considered less than people by the people of...
Right. In today's terms, she tries to make friends and bring marginalized people together.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about it is that what makes it interesting is that these are the result of... what Professor Barker is pointing at is that these are very subjective evaluations. And he does this again in a couple of other places. That, the sort of as we all know knowledge. Here are the, intelligent species of Tékumel. And as a storyteller, that gets presented, he sort of presents that as the as we all know knowledge. But he also simultaneously presents other knowledge which says, yeah, except that these people are intelligent, and these people are intelligent, and these people are intelligent. But, the supposedly smart races don't recognize that.
Right. And which is that she belongs to a group that has that mission, if I remember right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, an important principle of there's two important principles here that I want to bring out. One of them is that, in a phrase, Professor Barker is an unreliable narrator. That what he does in a lot of cases is he will present to you the in culture, in society, in world understanding of how things are, right? But he will also at other times introduce other knowledge that may contradict that, or be the exception to that, except how much of an exception, or the simplest example is that, as everyone knows, within the Five Empires, there are no riding beasts of any sort whatsoever. The horses and other riding beasts of before the time of darkness do not exist here in any way, shape, or form. All right, that's the as we all know knowledge. Except there are horses that are on the other side of the planet, on an island, that there are other riding beasts called Bajak that are far to the west. That the exceptions to the as we all know knowledge.
Well, and that's how the real world works, right? I mean, there's what's generally believed to be true, and then you run into exceptions. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And the number of times when people would ask me, no, really, I need to know, what is the thing? And they would ask Professor Barker this, and Professor Barker would pass it along to us. And so often we would have to start our answer to their question for absolute knowledge by saying, well, it depends. Or,
right.
It's not that simple.
Right. Which is that's part of, like I said, if people like that kind of world building or that kind of playing, then there's nothing wrong with a medieval high fantasy. I love those games, but there's a rich, textured, nuanced world here. Again, that is good for. I mean, you can play in it, you can read about it, you can read novels set in it. And the other thing I wanted to highlight. So, to me, it seems like the three. Man, there's more than this. I mean, you can go on Drive Through RPG or the Tékumel site, and you can find entire primers on how to learn the languages. And I mean, there's all that stuff too. But to me, it seems like the three main pillars of Tékumel, from a pop culture perspective, if you want to say it that way. I don't know if that's totally accurate. Is the tabletop RPGs, which I also want to mention that the current version of Tékumel is being published by Jeff D's Pocket Universe Games or Unicorn Games. Anyway, it's called Baythorm, which Baythorm means Pocket Universe, if I remember right.
That's correct. Yes.
So you could play the original, you can play one of the other ones that's been published, or you can support Jeff D and play in Baythorm. I have the original stuff that I bought at North Texas, and I have Baythorm.
John Till is working on an adaptation of Tékumel for Fate.
For the Fate play, there you go. And I think I could see, especially the role-playing aspects of Tékumel, of which the possibilities are incredibly rich for the role-playing aspects of Tékumel. I could see it fitting Fate very well. And then you've got the fiction, the books, and then you have the miniatures wargaming.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which is, I saw some wonderful miniatures at the convention. So tell us a little bit about that. How active is the wargaming? And if I remember right, Professor Barker was fairly active in the wargaming aspect too, was he not?
Oh yeah, he was Society of Ancients. He had a subscription. He read Slingshot. He built. I think he had several different miniature armies. We have there is an army of Egyptians that he had. He also had, let's see here, some fantasy medievals. But in addition to all of that, he had his own collection of miniatures. The original miniatures line was produced by Bill Murray for the Old Guard, which was back, the company that produced them under contract from TSR, the original TSR. And then they were subsequently bought and produced by Ral Partha. Before Ral Partha went out of business and is now back in business, right? But Ral Partha isn't producing them now. Howard Fielding, more recently, has produced a series of 28 millimeter figures for Tékumel and has developed a rather fanatical following of miniatures players, which I think is tremendous. It is very cool to see. Howard's miniatures are extremely well detailed. You can get them if you look up the the Tékumel Project miniatures. The Tékumel Project, you'll find them that way. And they're primarily armed at the military side of Tékumel, which, given that D&D emerged out of miniatures wargaming, is not really much of a surprise.
Wargaming and tabletop role-playing, especially in the 70s, were very closely associated. The miniatures that I saw were beautiful. And the entire setup was beautiful. And then, I've seen other pictures on the Tékumel Facebook group, which I encourage people to check out, where I see people posting their miniatures. And in fact, I tend to see more discussion, equal or more, about the miniatures than I do the role playing.
Well, I think it's because of the tremendous visual quality.
Right. Yeah.
People love to see the miniatures because it is, in a way, Tékumel brought to life in a
right.
three-dimensional way.
Right.
That's what makes it work. And the miniatures, the one big difference is that when Tékumel miniatures were first produced, 25 millimeter figures were not that expensive to buy. So presenting an army of 200 or 300 figures on a side, here's your cohorts of Shen, here are your heavy infantry, here's your slingers, here are your flying Hlaka scouts, all of that. That was not hard, or at least not expensive. But today, let's face it, 28s and 31s, as we're getting them today, they're, kind of pricey. So one of the things that we're exploring is how to make it possible for people to get some miniatures, more like 30 or 40 figures on a side, something where you're not having to, blow the bank in order to build an army, and then be able to have some sort of, miniatures battle and experience Tékumel that way. And Howard's been working on that. There are other people that have been working on different aspects of that. It's really great to see. And the figures themselves, if you wanted to, you could get the figures from Howard for the military units, but Jeff D also produces through Unigames a whole bunch of, Unigames produces a whole bunch of same scale flats, sort of cardboard heroes. And those are great. Jeff and Manda have done a wonderful job on presenting not just, warriors, but also monsters. And that's, I can't sing their praises too highly of that stuff. That's really, it's fun to see.
Yeah, I don't have time. I've got to start drawing this down. So I'll just mention this briefly, but Jeff D loves Tékumel. In fact, before I ever talked with Bob Alberti, Jeff D, a couple of years ago about the different games in his line, and he's the one that first was like, you need to read some of the books because Tékumel is, because I was like, what is this? I was like, what is this? And he goes, oh, well, have you ever heard of Empire of the Petal Throne? And I went, yeah. And he goes, well, that's, I'm publishing the current RPG for that world. And he really encouraged me to go read the books. And I mean, he's all about Professor Barker and Tékumel. So I just want to give a shout out to Jeff and, love for people to support his stuff. I do have to start kind of drawing this down, but I wanted to ask you a couple other things because it sounds to me like the Tékumel Foundation is doing a very active, proactive job in not only trying to keep Tékumel out there, like, hey, let's get these books republished and stuff. But if I understand right, it's also has a lot of work in clarifying legal rights that people may or may not have regarding Tékumel IP. So tell us a little bit about what the foundation does and, your role as president.
Okay. That really ought to be chief cook and bottle washer. It's a little bit more of a accurate statement.
Yeah.
The Tékumel Foundation started back in 2008, or at least it's planning for it. And the reason for it was that Gary Gygax died. All right. And I ended up going over, I had just finished I was in the process of finishing my PhD in sociology. And I was over at Professor Barker's house, and Gary had, the announcement had come that Gary had passed away. And I looked at Phil, who was not a young guy at the time, and I said, Phil, what's going to happen to Tékumel when you're gone? And he admitted that he hadn't really thought about it an awful lot. And I proposed the idea then that it would be good if there was it wouldn't be left to any one person to take care of, but that those of us who had, played in his games, and he had, how would I put this? That he had developed trust in his working relationship with us. That we form a nonprofit along the lines, something similar to the Hemingway Society or something like that. And I had just done a little bit of research on it, but the idea was to have a nonprofit to oversee Tékumel as his creative legacy. And he agreed that that was a good idea. And over the following 3 years before his death, we started to get things in place in order to make things happen. And since then, we've been assisted very much by his widow, Umbreen. And there have been other players on the Thursday night group and other Tékumel fans that formed the board of the foundation. And yeah, our job is to preserve and to promote Tékumel as his creative legacy. So that's why we're getting the novels back into print. Those are available on Amazon. We're also looking to have them produced by other producers, because not everyone wants to give Jeff Bezos more money. We're also reproducing game materials. Those are available through DriveThru RPG. And we also license companies like Unigames and John Till and Choice of Games and others, and Howard Fielding through the Tékumel Project, to produce materials that are approved for Tékumel. And that, it's a cottage industry at best, but as a niche of a niche within a niche.
Yeah. Well, there's love. It's a labor of love, but I could tell when I talk to you that you love, and it's the same thing with Bob Alberti. You love Tékumel, and you also love Professor Barker. I could tell,
Yeah.
And you played at his table for how many years? Were you his Tuesday night or his Thursday night group?
I was part of the Thursday night group.
Okay.
I played for a brief while in the late 70s when I was in high school. That did not last. I went off to college. And then I came back in the mid 80s. I think I started in like 84. And that meant, given how long Professor Barker was running games, about 25 years.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. Just talking with yourself and Bob, it's a incredible experience, and like I tried to share with you at North Texas, that was very special for me to hear your stories, and also to run the game, to play in the game you ran, because that's the closest I'll ever get to be in there. That's very special to me.
And that's why I want to share it with people, because Tékumel is amazing. Professor,
it really is.
He was my friend, and he was an amazingly complex person with lots and lots of things going on. He had a myriad range of interests, everything from opera to Egyptian hieroglyphics to all sorts of different kinds of archaeological subjects and memorabilia. And Tékumel. Tékumel was the thing that he created and developed as his own project. That was his personal project. Mm-hmm. And I think he very much held it apart from a lot of the other things that he was involved with, partly because he was also an academic at a time when admitting that you might have non-academic interests was seen as being perhaps that was dubious, right? But he believed in Tékumel as his own personal creation, and he wanted to share it with all of us. And that's what he's done. And that's what we try to preserve and make available for people again today.
I'm glad that you and the foundation are out there doing that. I think you've also mentioned that one of the jobs that the foundation does, which is very important if you're wanting to shepherd the legacy, is that in some cases, there's confusion as to who owns the rights to what.
Oh, that. Oh, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that. Yeah, actually, and that's part of that odyssey of game publishing that I alluded to earlier, is that over time, one of the things that we've had to do is to basically trace out all the different issues in terms of what happened to the intellectual property that Professor Barker produced for Tékumel over time. And I can say right now that through all the work that we've done, we've been able to gather everything back into the fold for the most part. There are a couple of items out there we're still trying to find people, that might have some interest in. But what we now know is that Professor Barker and now the foundation has the legal control of the intellectual property.
Right. And that's important, not from a despot standpoint, but if you're going to shepherd a legacy and make sure that, the stuff that's produced is quality and, because you're not trying to get rich out of this. It's not that kind of thing. Yeah, in fact, it probably costs you more in time and money than anything else.
Well, yeah. And here's another way of thinking about this. one of the comments that we get is, people allude to the similarities between Professor Barker and Greg Stafford, right? Greg Stafford is the creative force behind Glorantha, and the advantage that Glorantha had was that Greg, had that produced through Chaosium, and then they had to work out the agreement with Avalon Hill. And it had a very clear legal pedigree because of the few number of companies that were involved and the clarity of the legal ownership of IP. One of the things that's happened with Tékumel is that there's easily a half a dozen or more companies that have produced things for Empire of the Petal Throne, and we basically had to chase all those contracts down. And are they properly terminated? Was everyone adequately notified? How is that all taken care of? And that's a lot more work than just being able to say, "Oh, you're the company that's always produced it."
Yeah, the legal rights can get just really crazy, but it's a lot of work. It's probably a lot of thankless work. But I'm glad you're doing it. So to keep what's out there, I don't know if pure is the right word, but high quality, and somebody's caring to keep the torch alive. So my last question, and I have vastly appreciated your time. Speaking of getting it out to everybody, where is Tékumel Play happening? I know there's some happening in Austin. What cons, what convention, what places, what online groups can people connect with if they want to play some Tékumel, whether it's the RPG or the miniatures?
Well, you need to go for the back and tell them that Phil sent you. No, that's exactly what we don't want. So there are several different conventions where Tékumel can be played. Let's see here. The next one that will have a Tékumel track is Gamehole Con in Madison, Wisconsin, which conveniently is where I live, which makes that much easier.
Makes it a very easy one for you, yes.
Yeah, so we're going to have Gamehole Con, where there will be a Tékumel track this year. And then after the turn of the year, Con of the North in the Twin Cities, there's been a game track for Tékumel for several years now, quite a few years. And probably the convention with the longest track. Oh, wait, I've forgotten, and I should go back in time here for a moment. So after Gamehole Con, in November, there's going to be two different conventions. One of them is the Yukon Gaming Convention in Ypsilanti, Michigan, originally in Ann Arbor. And Yukon, which got its start at University of Michigan, has had probably the longest running continuous Tékumel track in the country for probably close to 20 to 25 years at this point.
Nice.
And so that'll be another convention where things go on. We're also planning on doing something at Millennium Con in Austin, Texas, a little bit after that in November. And then after that, we get to Con of the North. It'd be awfully nice if we could have some conventions on either the East or West Coast. And the Foundation is more than happy to help people out in terms of setting up Tékumel events at conventions and providing prizes and things like that.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. Yeah. Tékumel swag, baby.
Absolutely.
Right-thinking Tékumel players everywhere can receive their swag. So it's noble. It is noble swag. And it is noble to desire it. So would you say most of these conventions have both tabletop role-playing and miniatures? Or is it kind of hit or miss? Or
it's mostly tabletop role-playing.
Okay. Well, now, Millennium Con is more of a miniatures-focused con, but I think you said there also might be some tabletop role-playing as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I'm working with some folks there in Austin to put together stuff for that.
Nice.
And I should mention, besides Con of the North, Gary Con, run by Luke Gygax and a horde of friends and followers. Luke has put a huge amount of work into making Gary Con work, and by the sheer size of the convention, which is like 2,000 to 3,000 people easy at the Geneva Ridge Lodge. It was Geneva Grand Ridge Lodge, the old Playboy Club. They take over the entire place and then some. It's quite the event.
Yeah, I've heard that basically the people that love North Texas basically say you need to do North Texas, Gary Con, and Game Hall Con. They say that's the circuit you got to make.
Yeah, Game Hall Con is quite big, and all of these numbers are pre-COVID, so we'll see what they're like now. But Game Hall Con is truly a convention that's a little bit of everything. It has, all different kinds of role playing. It has True Dungeon. It has a bunch of different things that make it really kind of cool that way.
Well, do you know of any I know that there's the Discord channel, the Discord server for Tékumel, and I know that there's the Facebook group. Do you know of any other online focal points for Tékumel? Do you know if there's any Roll20 or anything like that going on?
There are some people that are doing Roll20. These are all done, on a fan basis.
Right.
I don't know the people that are doing things that way. I know that we get fairly consistent pings on putting together some material for Roll20 so that there's like a character sheet and there's other materials that people can use for running their own games.
Nice.
And it'd be nice to get those things going too. If anyone wants to help with that, drop me a line.
Okay. And what is the best way for people to contact you, Victor?
Like I said, go to the back. Tell them. No.
Yeah, Phil said, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. No, the best way to reach me is probably just send me a note at president at Tékumel Foundation, one word. That's TEKUMEL Foundation.org.
Right. And go to the TekumelFoundation.org website. It's pretty interesting.
Yes, we're about to update as we release Flame Song and get that out the door.
Well, I wish you nothing, but I know there's some Tékumel way of saying glorious setting for the rest of the day. I don't know what the right sign off is, but may the rest of your day be full of profound reflection and noble thought and action.
Yes, may the gods smile upon you and all those who are in your care.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks, Victor. Got to do the bad joke of the week, man. Got to do it. All right. Are you ready? Did you sign? Did your lawyer pass you the waiver? You did get that, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So that's signed. So I'm legally protected. Okay, Victor. Bad joke of the week. How do bovines do math?
I don't know. How do bovines do math?
Why, with a calculator. I would milk that, but I know we've got to go, so I'm not going to milk that any further.
Utterly terrible.
Yes, it was, sir. Yes. In fact, you probably think I'm a cud, which is a cad that makes cow jokes. So, yeah.
You're just going to have that emblazoned on your jersey.
Oh, okay. That was good. That was very good. So, all right. I will not play pun patty cake with you, sir.
Patty cake? Oh.
Okay. I got to run, man, but this has been a real treat.
I can just say right now, under the circumstances, I can tell you, never steer me wrong.
Oh, it's so bad. So bad.
And that's no goal.
Okay. All right. I gotta hoof it, man. But thank you so much again for the time, and good luck with all your efforts with Tékumel. Thanks so much for listening to Shane Plays Geek Talk. I certainly hope you enjoyed this journey into the things we love. For your convenience, show notes with helpful links for each episode can always be found at shaneplays.com. You can catch the podcast in several places, including on the blog at shaneplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, Amazon Music, Verbal, YouTube, and more. Shane Plays is also carried on sci-fi.radio. Sci-fi.radio is sci-fi for your Wi-Fi. sci-fi.radio.com. If you like what you hear and would like to support Shane Plays Geek Talk, you can do so for as little as $1 per episode on Patreon at patreon.com/ShanePlays. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Stay geeky, my friends.